textbook, the teachers may just follow it exactly as it's laid out without thinking for themselves. They may not initiate anything that's not in the course book. They may be discouraged from thinking for themselves. So they think that the person who wrote the materials is an expert, so they can do the thinking for them. And they may not use their own professional judgment or initiative. Added to these possibilities is the fact that there are some institutions, I came across this in Turkey in one institution, that insist on very close adherence to the book. You have to go through every single thing in the book, and you may not delete anything or add other things. But these are the minorities. I think most institutions are not so fussy. And even if they are, there's no way they can check, because nobody's going to come in to all your lessons and make sure you're only doing the textbook. A minority of teachers may see it as an easy option. By the nature of things, there won't be any of those kinds of teachers in this talk, because they're the kinds of teachers who are not interested in development and are just doing teaching as a job and going home and doing as little as possible. So that is a minority like this, but they are definitely a minority. And then we've got the teachers who are not unprofessional, but less confident. They're beginner teachers, or they haven't got very much experience, or they're a little less confident, and they might not want to diverge from the textbook. However, having said all of this, it rarely happens, in fact. The first reason is that there are inevitably some aspects that you can't possibly do exactly as the course book says, because the course book doesn't tell you how to do it. For instance, it doesn't tell you, it gives you a grammar exercise and it says, answer the following questions. But it doesn't tell you whether the questions will be answered in writing or in speech. And it doesn't tell you whether the exercise is to be done in class or for homework. And if it's a reading text, it doesn't tell you how exactly to present the reading text. So even if you're adhering closely to the textbook, there are areas where inevitably the teacher has to take decisions about how to mediate what is on the page. The second reason is that most teachers do, in fact, adapt beyond the obvious choices I just mentioned, how to mediate exercises and text. But most teachers do go beyond that and adapt, and there is some research to show that this is so. They do tasks differently from the way the textbook designers intended. They add things, they adapt, sometimes using AI, and they omit bits they feel they are necessary, or that they don't like, or that they simply don't have time for. Very often we have, or let's say very infrequently, do we manage to get through the entire textbook in a year, and inevitably there are things which are going to be left out, omitted, or shortened. There is the other extreme, teaching without a textbook. There was a time, even today, there are some people for whom this is a sort of very desirable, that the teacher should not be relying on a textbook, but should be teaching from his or her own initiative and ideas. And it's encouraged by some experts. In recent years, about in the early 2000s, there was the dogme approach promoted by Scott Thornbury and his colleagues, and I've got the reference there if you want it, which says not that you shouldn't use textbooks at all, but that you should use them as little as possible, and the main teaching process should be based on a conversation between teacher and learners, with the teacher's initiative playing a large part, and the given materials playing a relatively small part, if any. There is also, in recent years, a stress on teacher agency and teacher initiative, the teacher doing their own thing, which is important. the use of AI has enabled us to compose and shorten length and do all sorts of things with text that we couldn't do before, or that took much more time to do. And that has also increased the possibility of using no textbook and enabling teachers to do more without it. But still, just trying to move on, the most common situation is that a course book is used and may often be mandatory. In my own context in Israel, it is normally mandatory. You have to use a given textbook which has been approved by the ministry. Teachers use it while mostly adapting in various ways, adding, omitting, changing. I think most of you who are listening to me now are aware that this is what they do in their classrooms. And I'm going to spend most of this lecture actually looking at ways in which textbooks may be adapted in various ways. So my interim conclusion is this. In principle, yes, use a textbook. I'm in favor of using a textbook. I don't think I, in my own teaching, could have managed without one, frankly. Partly because it gives me a ready-made syllabus. It lets me off having to design my own syllabus. It gives me structure. I don't have to work out what to do first, what to do next, how to build the course. It provides me with ready-made texts, which I may or may not use, but they're there, and I can use them if I want to, and I can adapt them. They're a basis. It gives me tasks and exercises. Again, I can play with these, and I'll be suggesting some ways you can do so later on in this talk. But they're there to be used and adapted and save me the immensely time-consuming process of composing my own. It provides me very often with reviews and tests and a framework and other like the same thing really as structure. And repeating myself, sorry. But the main thing is that it also provides an awareness of progress. That my going through the textbook gives me a sort of concrete idea of how far I've got, how far I still have to go, and how well I am progressing. It gives also my students a satisfying feeling. If we're halfway through the book, look how much we've done. It's a nice feeling of progress. So my own interim conclusion on the de-skill issue is the coursebook does not normally de-skill. I've given examples where it might slightly because the institutions insist on it or because teachers are not sufficiently confident, but normally it does not normally skill, and it may even n-skill. In other words, for a beginner teacher, the coursebook very often provides them with some very valuable guidance, which enables them in the first years of teaching to learn the teaching skills. A bad teacher, in my view, will be even worse if they don't have a textbook, and a good teacher will be even better with it. So, bottom line, I'm in favor, as I told you with the first slide in this presentation, that I do not think that the coursebook normally de-skills a teacher. But clearly, there is need for adaptation. Some of the material may not suit your particular student population. It may be too difficult for them, too easy for them, culturally inappropriate, all sorts of reasons why it may not be appropriate, and it may not suit you. I always think that the sort of student-centered view of teaching, which is very popular these days, overlooks the rights of the teacher in a way. The teacher also is a person and has their own preferences, desires, teaching style, and views on how the language should be taught. And sometimes I, anyway, and I'm sure many of you, may omit or adapt something in the textbook simply because it doesn't fit me. It's not the way I like to teach, and I'm going to do it slightly differently so that I feel more comfortable with it. Other reasons to adapt are to increase the learning value of an exercise or text, to make more interesting, to make more available to different learners. These are the three basic principles of teaching, aren't they? Learning, they want them to learn, we want them to be interested, and we want the learning to be available to learners at different levels, different learning styles, different personalities, and so on. So I'll just briefly say a few words about each of these. Learning value is the question, is basically how much learning do students get relative to the time and effort invested. I rather like, Jeremy Harmer has this acronym TITO, time in, time out. How much time did I put into an activity and how much actual learning time came out of it? And some textbook activities are not very learning rich. A typical example is word search, for example, which is very popular and students love it. But actually, if you analyze what they're doing, when they're doing word search, they're spending most of the time looking for the words, not finding them. They find them in a second, and then they go on to spend several seconds or even a minute or two looking for the next word, and then a second finding it, and then another minute looking for the next one, and so on. And the proportion of actual engaging with the target vocabulary versus the searching time when they aren't really learning anything is disproportionate. So word search is a fun activity, but it is not learning rich. And I could give you lots and other examples, but I haven't got time. But this is just a sample of what I mean by learning value, an activity which the investment of time and effort is worth the amount of learning or practice that comes out of it. And the question is, how much time are we wasting in our classes and puzzling out, as in word search or hangman or whatever? Speaking L1, how much time are we wasting on speaking L1? How much time are we wasting on setting up activities? If there is an activity which involves very complex getting into groups and getting out of groups or distributing materials, it may take time away from the learning, or busy work, coloring, formatting, and so on, takes time away from real learning. So my second point was interest. I said learning value, interest. Interest is very, very difficult to define. I've done entire sessions based on question of interest and how to interest students. It's really difficult. I mean, I could ask you to try and define it, but that would take up a lot of time because it's really, really difficult. It's a combination, in my view, of if students are interested in something, we see that they are voluntarily attending, they are involved in doing something, and there is an element of enjoyment. And you can express it like this, in a sort of Venn diagram like this. An activity in the textbook which has active task involvement and voluntary attention, like a test, for example. They might be paying attention, but I wouldn't call them being interested because there is no element of enjoyment, and so on. You can look at other examples, but I think this diagram expresses it well. And sometimes I will adapt the textbook activities because I want to raise interest using one or more, or preferably all three of these components. My third reason for changing things, adapting a textbook, were making material available to students at different levels. If you look at your textbook, you look at an exercise, it is sort of implicitly assumed that all the students need to do all the texts and exercises, which may or may not be at an appropriate level. And the bottom line is, so we need to do things with them to adapt them to different levels. I'll give some examples later. The problem is time. If I'm going to adapt the textbook, I need time to do it. It's relatively easy. Okay, you can omit components, and then that doesn't take any time. It just takes a quick decision. But if you want to add or adapt, it takes more time. It takes too much preparation time to select or compose additional texts or tasks. To adapt text, even with the help of AI, it's still, if you tell AI to shorten or lengthen or elaborate or simplify a text, it'll do it for you, but you still need to feed in the prompt and then check that it's done it the way you want. It still takes time, and adapting tasks also takes time. So what I'm going to do for the rest of the time I have left, I have about half an hour left, I'm going to look at ideas for textbook adaptation that don't demand too much preparation time, because we simply don't have it. What can we do? How can we, as conscientious professional teachers, adapt textbook components to make them more learning rich, interesting, and adapted to different levels, without investing an inordinate amount of preparation time? I'm going to pause for a second here and ask you if you'd like to raise your hands or speak about anything I've said up to now, and give me a bit of a break also, so I can stop and listen for a moment, or read anything you'd like to write into the chat box about any of the issues I've raised up to now. Yeah, Gil has a very important comment here. The AI can do all these things. But it does depend on you, how you give the prompt to the AI and how you use what AI has provided for you. And it wasn't written by teachers, absolutely, Gil. What are the signs of a good textbook? I'll have to do another session on that. That's a huge question, Danielle. Thanks. It's a very relevant question, very good question. I simply don't have time to answer it. What are signs of which textbook should we try to use? Again, very good question, and I just don't have time to answer it here. Perhaps if any other participants would like to give Danielle at least a partial answer, then write it up in the chat box by all means.
I just wanted to point out how happy I was when you pointed out the thing about the word search activities or the unscramble. I mean, with all the emphasis on students struggling with dyslexia, using scrambled words, in which sometimes the whole point is to put the word in the correct order, so that it looks like the word, and then unless you ask the students to do something with the vocabulary, there is no target vocabulary engagement. It's just we are playing detectives and we are wasting time. So thank you for this.
Love doing it, don't they? But they don't actually learn very much.
They don't always. I find that the older they get, the less they like it. Young learners do like it, but there are other ways in which we can engage them. I totally agree about that exercise task.
Danielle, how much preparation time a week should we aim to be doing? That really depends on how many hours you're teaching, how long you have. A very, very rough estimation, in my experience, is about the same amount of preparation to teaching time. But if you're teaching 30 hours a week, that's obviously not practical. So it really depends how much your preparation, how many hours you're teaching, and how much preparation time you have, whether you can invest the same sort of time that you're teaching into, say, for each hour teaching an hour's preparation, or whether you can do more for some privileged situations, or whether you have to do less. Top 2 favorite textbooks English teaching. I'm not up to date with textbooks, school textbooks at the moment. I suppose you're talking about international ones. So I'm not expert enough to answer that, but I would like to invite the audience to answer Danielle's question. What are your favorite textbooks, please write up and say what you like, what you've used and really like it.
And we go with textbooks, or would we go with publishers?
Yeah,
Because
also,
from what we see in the last 20 years,
yeah.
it's that publishers have a very specific methodological rationale and a line that they follow,
Yeah,
which is reflected everywhere in the
yeah,
way they design the page, the way they clutter or declutter the syllabus, and then
yeah,
consequently the page, the unit, the test, the workbook, the
yeah,
components, and the way they use technology, because
yeah,
sometimes
yeah,
technology can become overwhelming. It adds a lot to the actual materials planning.
yeah.
But yes, I can definitely see the point in that question.
Danielle, I don't want to promote a particular textbook here, but other people, yes, please, if so, have a look at what the other teachers are saying here. Okay, I'll move on to ideas for textbook adaptation. And please feel free to write things up in the chat box as I'm going. I'm going to start off with reading texts. Aspects of them can be adapted the way we mediate the text and comprehension and familiarization tasks. So starting with presenting a new text, pre-teaching vocabulary, does that help? A lot of teacher training courses actually say as a sort of a matter of course. Yes, of course, you should pre-teach vocabulary. And a lot of the textbooks automatically give a list of vocabulary first before they present the texts. In many courses, it's a standard procedure, but you need to take into account, and in my experience, and I'm sure in your experience as well, you can teach, say, 10, 15 words that they're going to need for the text. But it's an overload. And what you find when they come across the word in the text, even though they've just been taught them, they don't remember when they meet them in the text what they mean. They don't remember. And there is also some research evidence that learning new vocabulary is best when the first encounter is in context, i.e. they come across it for the first time within the text context, and the teacher explains it, and then review it. I was talking to a group of teachers recently, and one of the teachers suggested, and this is something I hadn't thought of, and I think it's a really good idea, that the preliminary teaching, the pre-teaching, is what's called priming. In other words, you don't expect the students to remember the word immediately the first time you teach it, but the preliminary exposure is just a sort of priming it, raises conscious. It's a first encounter, so that the next time you encounter it, it will be just that little bit easier to perceive and understand it, even though you haven't really just really learned it thoroughly. It is, however, I think we need to know it's okay not to pre-teach. It's okay to ignore that preliminary list of vocabulary and simply teach the words as they come up in the text, and then use the list later, perhaps, for review. Then there's the question about, should you ask students to guess from context? And those of you who know me know that I'm a bit skeptical about this. Normally, in most natural texts, an unknown word, the meaning of an unknown word, cannot be guessed, not even by a very fluent, knowledgeable speaker of the language. You can't normally, I think it's something like less than 50% of the cases can you, in fact, infer the meaning of a new word from the context. So it's not really fair to ask our students to do it. I think we should only do it when we're pretty sure that, yes, the context does give it away very clearly. So that's about pre-teaching vocabulary. Thank you for that comment, Amos. Yes, there is quite a lot of research. First reading then. What I saw when I was in teacher training full time and visiting schools, I saw teachers routinely asking students to sight read the new text round the class. So one student reads the first sentence and the next student reads the next sentence or paragraph and whatever around the class. And the result was very often that the student reading was concentrating so hard on the decoding and the pronunciation and so on that they didn't have any attention to spare for understanding, and they found it very difficult to cope with understanding the text. And the students normally do not sight read very well, so the text was not in fact mediated very well to the rest of the class, the meaning. Silent reading is not the answer either, because very often the new text is too difficult for the students to cope with on their own. Silent reading. Probably the best answer in most cases, again, I'm cautious here, not 100%, but in most cases, that the teacher reads aloud and students follow. The teacher reading aloud, the teacher knows how to read well. The teacher can mediate the reading, the meaning and effect of the text much more efficiently and effectively than can the student, and it frees the student from having to read aloud and decode, and helps them to understand the first reading. So on the whole, this is probably the best way of mediating a text in the first time the students meet it. Comprehension and familiarization. Well, normally what the textbooks do is comprehension questions, right? I want to look also at alternative tasks involving and supporting comprehension questions. Problem with comprehension questions. There's several problems with comprehension questions. The first major problem is that they test comprehension, they don't support it. And what we want to do as teachers is support. We want to help the students understand the text, not test retroactively if they have done so. And the comprehension question test retroactively, basically. The second problem with comprehension questions is that they may not even check comprehension. Have a look at this. The chunks was blunging fruly nedeng the broodigan. Some chunks was unread, but the other chunks was unreader. They was all polkit and rather chiglop, so they did not meckle the spooler. A few were unstemetic. Okay, questions. What were the chunks doing? Can you write in the chat box, please? What were the chunks doing? Blunging, quite correct. How were they blunging? Truly, correct. Where were they blunging? You're all answering correctly. Where were they blunging? Nedeng the broodigan. And I could go through it all. You would be able to answer all the questions correctly. And I have to congratulate you on answering comprehension questions without comprehending. These comprehension questions simply do not check comprehension. You can answer them without knowing what on earth this text is about. Incidentally, just as a side comment here, look at the words which are underlined in the text. And I'll ask you, do you know what part of speech the underlined words are? And the answer is yes. Chanks, the chanks. Chanks is obviously a noun. Fruly is obviously an adverb. Polkit is obviously an adjective, and so on and so on. And it's interesting that the fact that you can deduce very easily what part of speech a word is does not help you understand it. And therefore, what I often say to teachers, don't worry about getting your students to tell you what part of speech it is. It's not going to help them. It doesn't help to know the part of speech. And when you look a word up in the dictionary, you don't immediately go to check if it's adj or n or v. You just look up the meaning. The part of speech is really not so important. But let's go back to questions which actually do check comprehension. What can you do about this? You can make sure that the questions, if the textbook is using the exact words of the text, it's not going to check comprehension. For example, you could use different wording or ask students to answer out underlying meanings. For example, let's say we have this sentence in the text. Mr. Smith asked his wife for assistance and she agreed. Now, a bad question is, who did Mr. Smith ask for assistance? Because you can answer it without knowing what assistance means or what wife means or anything like that. And it's doing exactly what the Chanks text did. It's asking questions based on on exactly the same wording as the original. And if your textbook does this, then they're bad comprehension questions. Most textbooks, I have to say, that I've seen recently, the questions are better worded so as to elicit understanding, but still, it's something which you need to be aware of. So a better question might be, who did Mr. Smith get to help him? Which means they need to know what assistance means. And an even better one, in a way, is, was Mr. Smith married? Because you have an underlying presupposition that he's married because there's the word wife there. But these are just examples. The third problem with comprehension questions is that they're often boring. And we can look at other possibilities here. What can we do about it? Use a variety of tasks that involve comprehension, provided these are ones that are quick and easy to prepare and do. I keep coming back to this because of the limitation on preparation time. The bad question, says Gil, is a low order thinking still. Yes, absolutely. It's just reproduction or recall. It doesn't involve actually thinking or higher order thinking. I want to go here to some ideas from Alan Maley, who is a good friend and someone who I very much admire, who wrote a couple of books which, well, the first one is a book, the second is an article, with a variety of suggestions for comprehension work on short texts, which I think are really, really useful and easy to do as an alternative to comprehension questions. And there are these. I'll flash this quickly on the screen now, but I'll go through each one so you don't need to remember them. I'm going to look at this text here. It's rather a disgusting one, but never mind. Just have a look at that short text. What can we do with comprehension exercises on this other than comprehension questions? It's about, I suppose, B1 stroke B2 level. First one on this was shortening. So what you do is you ask the students, take the text and see what words you could delete from it while retaining the original meaning. Well, if you had to delete something here, what would you delete? Possibly? Let's see.
Ever since you woke up?
Okay, you've been looking forward to eating a nice ripe banana, and you can cross out ever since you woke up. Okay, anything else?
Just when you reach for the fruit?
Yes, or someone wrote in here, nice, delicious.
Yes.
So you could, right? Or
yeah,
and so on, yes. But the thing is that it's fun to do, and they can only do it if they've understood the text. So it is, in a sense, a comprehension exercise. Shorten the text, so delete words text, which is what we've just done, or summarize, or summarize in L1, also kind of shortening, or compose a new title. And all these are comprehension work because they can't do them without comprehending or make brief notes. Lengthening, same idea. Here I'm not going to do it on the screen, but ask you to suggest. What might you add to this text? Can write in the chat box or say, what might you insert? For example, you might say, in the last line, a horrible swarm of fruit flies, or your breakfast counter in the third line. You can add in the sun is shining. Someone has suggested, yes, you can add in full sentences, the sun is shining.
Just when you hungrily reach for the delicious
Just when you hungrily reach for the delicious piece of fruit and so on. Okay, other ways. So add single words, phrases, add sentences, add margin notes, add an ending or a continuation, add a preface, something before. The third wink thing you might do is changing, and here I'm not going to do it with you, but change any of the words here into synonyms, and it's a or paraphrase. So it's a good way of enlarging the vocabulary as well as checking and ensuring understanding. Change words within the text, change the title. Selection is another thing you can do with text. Ask students to select bits out of the text. For example, can you tell me the most important sentence? What do you think the most important sentence is? Or the 10 words and phrases that are most essential for understanding. This would be obviously from a longer passage. Find all the words that relate to a particular topic. Find the sentence that the teacher reads out. Or find the sentence where the teacher reads out the translation in your language. Find it in English. And all these would again engage the students in understanding. Transformation means transforming the text into some other form. So either translate into your own language or rewrite in simple English for a less advanced learner. We make sure they don't do it through AI. They have to do it on their own, but rewrite in simple English, convert to a PowerPoint presentation or draw an illustration or rewrite as a different genre or a different style. And finally, for more advanced students, perhaps this is more for literature, criticism and perfect and personal response, responding the text in some personal way. Again, it's understanding. You can't do it unless you understand it. What did you feel about this text? Say what you admire or dislike about a character in a story. And the other points I'll let you read on your own, these kinds of things. So these are all personal responses. Before I move on to exercises, I'd just like to mention one other way of dealing with a text in order to familiarize and focus on the meaning of the text. And that's something called reader's theatre. I don't know how many of you have come across reader's theatre. It's I've spelt theatre in the American spelling because it is basically an American idea used in American schools quite a lot, but has spread worldwide. And the idea is that students are given a play or a sketch and they read out the different parts and perform while reading instead of having to learn by heart the different parts, as you can see in the picture. But the way I use it is with any text at all, a paragraph, even something like this, the one on the fruit flies, which we've just seen. And I ask them to do the same sort of thing as they do in readers' theatre. The goal is that they, in groups, read the text aloud in order to get its meaning across to the audience as dramatically and impactfully as possible. They rehearse and then perform. So I say, give a paragraph, divide the class into groups, Tell each group they have 10 minutes to prepare a reading of this paragraph and present it to the class. It could be all the same paragraph, or it could be different paragraphs. And the instructions are they may use any or all of these. So they may have solo reading or choral. They may vary the volume, pitch, speed. They may use pause, gesture, repetition, all sorts of things to make sure that the text is conveyed to the rest of the class effectively and preferably dramatically. I've done this giving different groups all the same paragraph to prepare, and they always do it different ways. It's really amazing the variations they come up with, but they come out understanding the text. The ones who didn't understand it very well, by the end of the exercise, they've all understood it well. They very often, a side effect of it is that very often the phrases and the words and the chunks within the text that they have read stay with them. They learn them very well and remember them. Let's have a look at grammar and vocabulary exercises, adapting grammar and vocabulary exercises. The techniques change the way you mediate the exercise, or change the way you check answers, or delete bits in order to make open-ended, personalize, recycle, add, extend, vary. And I have 10 minutes left, and I'm going to have to do this rather fast, but I will give you my email at the end of this presentation. If you'd like me to send you the PowerPoint, I'm very happy to do so. So change the way you mediate. Normally, a grammar and vocabulary exercises are mediated through what's called IRF, initiation, response, feedback, sort of teacher-student ping-pong. The teacher invites responses to a question, students raise their hands, the teacher nominates one student to answer, and the teacher responds. So initiation, response, and teacher feedback. And this is in all kinds of subjects, not just English. Have a look at these questions. So this is the a sort of example of a set of questions which I designed for you rather than for English learners. They're sort of questions about the English language. And normally, what is the opposite of help? The student raises their hand and they volunteer the answer, and I say yes or no. But another possibility is, instead of saying, okay, number one, what is the opposite of help? Number two, what is a one-word verb, and so on, I say to them, listen, look through the questions, and I'll ask you to look through the questions now. Choose one you know the answer to, and raise your hand. So there's a little bit of a pause while they look through the questions. And I say, you don't need to know all the answers, but the ones you know, raise your hand. And one of the results of this is that the weaker students, who perhaps couldn't answer the first question, but could answer one of the others, can raise their hands to volunteer the answer to the one they know immediately, and they don't have to wait to compete with all the rest. And it's also a bit more interesting to do because I'm looking for the ones I know and feeling good about the ones I know, not worrying too much about the ones I don't, because in the end, either the more advanced students or the teacher will tell me, but I have a chance to choose the ones I know. Another possibility is to say to them, okay, look, do it in writing, look through the questions, and with the help of another student or on your own, whichever you like, write in the answers. And again, you don't need to know them all. Write in all the ones you know, and you can check the answers yourselves. So here are the answers. If any of you were wondering about some of the answers, here they are. And as I said before, if you want me to send you the PowerPoint presentation later, you're very welcome to write to me and I will do so. So the changes in the normal conventional ping pong are, firstly, orally. Give the students time to look through the questions first, and then they choose which questions they want to answer. And there's a possibility of self-check. Or if they're doing it in writing, first read quietly through the exercise or read items aloud without actually doing it. Then write the answers in any order you like. It's okay not to do them all. And I think this is really important for the students at different levels, that they should feel that they can choose ones they know and not feel guilty about not doing the ones that they don't know the answers to. And so these kinds of instructions help with very mixed level classes. Do at least 7 items more if you can. Do as much as you can in 5 minutes. Again, each student working at their own speed. And finally, the self-check in the way I showed before. Another way to vary exercises and make them more accessible, interesting, and learning rich are deleting bits in order to make them what I call open-ended, open-ending cues that allow for many possible right answers rather than one, so that more learners can get to respond and each item is engaged with more than once and they can respond at different levels. So those of you who know my lectures probably seen this example before. A closed-ended question would be, Jenny can't ride a bicycle, which is right. One right answer. An open-ended, in order to practice can and can't, could be, Jenny's a baby, Jenny can't ride a bicycle, but she can smile. What else can or can't Jenny do? Lots of right answers and lots of practice of can, can't at different levels. So that's the difference between closed-ended and open-ended. Most textbook exercises are closed-ended. There's one predetermined right answer. Why? Good question. Firstly, it's a conventional default way. It's the way people have always done it. You know, questions have their multiple choice and their gap fills. And that's the way exercises are done in textbooks. It's easy to check. A computer can check it. And it's lower order thinking skills again. It may or may not be easier. Daniel, I can't put the answers up again, but I'll send them to you if you write to me, okay? May or may not be easier. Sometimes teachers say, well, a closed-ended question is easier. It may not be. It depends on the vocabulary. Let's look at some examples. Making closed-ended exercise into open-ended can be done mainly with gap fill, simply by removing the alternatives for the gap. But you can also do it with the same thing with matching exercise and multiple choice. And the result is there is more learning because you've got lots of answers instead of one. It's more interesting and more individualized because students can respond at different levels. And again, those of you who've been to other presentations of mine may have come across the examples I'm going to give, but they're good examples. I make no apology for giving them again. Let's look at this one. Basic kind of gap fill exercise, okay? Root form at the end, and they have to put in the past tense. She left early, he made the cake, I sat there for 6 hours, the man read the book. And the first variation would be delete the sentence ending. So I delete early, the cake, there for 6 hours, the man, the book, and tell the students, ignore the end of the sentence and just give me any ending you like with the verbs. So it comes out like this. She left, and students come out with things like, she left the room, she left early, she left late, she left her husband, she left, and so on. And some more advanced students come up with things like she left her book in the car, using left in a slightly different meaning. And you get lots and lots of answers, much more interesting, much more learning rich, because you're getting lots more practice of the target forms. Another alternative is to delete the verb and challenge students to think of different verbs to put in. So tell students, ignore the verb at the end of the sentence. And what would you put in? She, early. What other words could you, past tenses? And there you get lots more practice of different verb, past forms of verbs. So it comes out like this. And then personalize, ask the students to insert names of people they know instead of the names, or pronouns in the sentence, or put in I or my or me, or alter the sentences to make them true for me. So you might, in the previous exercise I showed you, make I the subject instead of the different pronouns or name or nouns. Finally, recycle in different ways. And all these are possibilities. Again, I'm not going to read them aloud, just leave the slide up for a couple of seconds for you to look at. All of these are variations on the original, which allow for perhaps more learning, more review of an exercise which was based on material you really want your students to master well. In general, we may omit an exercise completely if we feel it learning poor and so on. We may do it as it stands and then introduce a variation in some of the ways I've suggested here. And redoing an exercise does provide for more learning, more interest, and more opportunities for learners at different levels. And that's it, guys. And here is my email. If you would like a copy of the PowerPoint, please feel free to write to me. My email is very easy. You could almost make it up on your own, penny@gmail.com. And thank you for listening, and thank you for contribution.
We have a couple of questions in the chat. Dimitra is asking about I think the past tense form exercise. And there was another point made by Dimitra just before, but it fell behind. Should the teacher make pauses to ask students comprehension questions or discuss the text at the end?
Sorry, could you say that again?
Yes. Should the teacher make pauses to ask students comprehension question or discuss the text at the end, if we assume that the teacher is reading the text out to the learners?
The teacher, I think we read it at the speed and using pauses as we feel we feel the students' need. We all know our students, and the way you read it and how much time you leave before, after, and during the reading of the text really depends on your own professional judgment. So I can't give a single answer to that one. Let me just take, if anybody has wanted my email, I'm sure they've already copied it. So let me unshare the screen and see you better. Right. Okay. The question about checking different things, not the past simple verbs, rather their use in context, Dimitra. Well, you've got an answer from Amos there. And my answer would be similar to Amos's, but also I think the past simple of the verb, we need to practice it in context. So it's both really, both the form and the use in context. Thank you for your thank yous.
Well, it is us who should thank you. How much you have managed to tell us in just 1 hour. Really inspiring. Thank you so much. Just a couple of announcements as we wrap up. Well, obviously, IATEFL is coming up in April. We will hopefully meet up in Edinburgh from the 7th to the 11th. And I'm fully aware that Edinburgh is not the most easy to reach destination, but it is a beautiful place. And regarding our own events, there will be an event in April, but it will be at the end of the Easter break. So the 27th of April, that's the last Sunday. We did that so that you can take a breath of fresh air and say, there is Tesol. So what does it matter that we're going to school next day? Nice. And then in May, there are so many exams and so many things happening. No event, but in June, Alexandra Popovsky will be presenting. She won't be the president of IATEFL anymore. Chris Graham will have taken over. She will be the vice chair, but it is such a great honor. And of course, we will share the event with our associates as well. Thank you, Penny, from the bottom of my heart. It's always inspiring to listen to you presenting. Thank you, everyone, for attending. And we will upload this recording on our channel as well, so it will be reachable in a couple of days. Thank you so much. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.